Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to dive into a rapidly unfolding development that many people are calling the Belarus route collapse, or more precisely, how recent geopolitical moves have put China-Europe overland trade, often called the China-Europe Railway Express, into a deep crisis. Over the years, one of the fastest growing arteries of trade between China and Europe has been the rail link through Belarus into Poland. This overland corridor wasn't just a niche route, it helped bridge landlocked logistics with speed and reliability. The rail line offered a sweet spot, faster than sea freight and cheaper than air, but now that corridor is shaken. The trouble began in September 2025 when Poland made a dramatic call. It closed all its crossing points with Belarus, including the critical rail interface. The official justification: security. Poland cited escalating tensions tied to Russian-Belarusian military exercises and a series of drone incursions into its airspace, allegedly from Belarus or Russia. The rationale from Warsaw was clear. The logic of security had overtaken the logic of trade. The immediate consequences were severe. More than 130 freight trains carrying goods from China were abruptly stalled at Brest, a major logistics hub in Belarus, because they couldn't cross into Poland. That translates into a freeze in a corridor that handles roughly euros 25 billion of trade annually. For context, this rail link is responsible for nearly 90% of all China-EU rail freight. This isn't just a small hiccup in international logistics. It's a structural shock to a supply chain that had become strategically important. The European Commission has acknowledged the disruption. While they call it significant, they also say it's being monitored carefully. Still, the fact that Poland's Interior Ministry has indicated the border closure may remain until further notice raises big questions about the long-term viability of this trade artery. One of the most concerning implications is cost and time. With the rail link severed, carriers are now exploring alternative routes. Some are rerouting via the Baltics. Others are considering the southern corridor through Kazakhstan, across the Caspian and Black Seas, and then into Turkey or the Balkans. Every single one of these detours adds complexity, cost, and transit time. Rail-sea combinations or longer land paths simply don't match the speed and predictability of the Belarus-Poland route. For Chinese e-commerce giants like Temu and Shein, which rely heavily on overland rail for tight delivery cycles, this crisis is more than theoretical. Slower routes mean slower deliveries, higher costs, and potentially lost competitiveness. For European importers used to stable, predictable rail service, this is a serious blow. But beyond logistics, the event is deeply geopolitical. Poland's move underscores how trade corridors are no longer just economic lifelines, they're strategic leverage points. By shutting the Belarus border, Poland is signaling that its security concerns now override commercial interests, and it's willing to weaponize economic choke points to exert pressure. From China's perspective, this is a wake-up call. The country has heavily invested in belt and road infrastructure, including these overland rail links, to reduce dependence on maritime routes and diversify its trade channels. But those investments are now proving vulnerable to geopolitical shifts in Europe. Despite Beijing's push, Poland initially refused to reopen the route, even after Chinese diplomatic engagement. Belarus, too, finds itself in a delicate spot. As a strategic partner to China in this corridor, it loses transit revenue when crossings shut. At the same time, its close political alignment with Russia gives Warsaw and other EU states reason to worry about national security. Interestingly, Poland eventually indicated a reopening of the border, But even that comes with caveats. Warsaw has warned that it may not hesitate to close again if regional tensions flare up. This conditional approach underscores how fragile the arrangement is. Any renewal of military or diplomatic tension could easily shut things down again. On the EU side, Brussels finds itself walking a tightrope. The European Commission has expressed concern about the economic fallout, but has also repeatedly emphasized that security was the main driver behind Poland's closure. For the EU, this raises uncomfortable questions. Can strategic trade routes be safely commercial infrastructure if they can be shut at a moment's notice? And what does that mean for Europe's economic resilience? Looking ahead, what might this crisis mean for the future of China-Europe trade? First, it could fuel greater investment in alternative corridors, notably the southern one through Central Asia, or even more maritime rail combinations. But shifting volumes at scale won't be costless. These routes are slower, less established, and might not be able to absorb the same capacity quickly, which could push up freight costs or delay deliveries. Second, this disruption could push China to accelerate domestic investment in logistics to reduce exposure to politically volatile transit zones. It could also strengthen Beijing's argument for a multipolar infrastructure system that doesn't overly rely on any single geopolitical flashpoint. Third, for Europe, this might prompt a reassessment of how it thinks about trade infrastructure. Strategic routes need strategic thinking. If trade corridors are to be truly reliable, European nations may need to invest more in diversified links, buffer capacity, or even rail. See hybrid systems, but that in turn demands political will and long-term planning. Finally, this episode could further entrench the idea that economic interdependence is not a shield against geopolitical risk. For China, the promise of overland trade was to reduce dependence on maritime routes. But now it's clear that geography and geopolitics still matter deeply. For Europe, the crisis is a reminder that trade is not separate from national security. In short, the Belarus route gone scenario is more than a logistical hiccup. It's a geopolitical inflection point. It forces a reckoning on the stability of overland trade in a world where political calculations can sever critical arteries overnight. And it underscores that for all the ambition of Belt and Road, the dream of seamless Eurasian connectivity may face sharper strategic constraints than many assumed. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you think. Will China find a reliable alternative? Will Europe adapt? And do you see this as a turning point in the geopolitics of global trade?